Alrighty, so good afternoon. Thank you for having me. And so since I updated that bio, I haven't updated the bio, but I guess since we're talking about some of the work from the book. I've won 2 National Book Awards for this. So one from the American Political Science Association and also one from National Conference of Black Political Scientists for Best Book Award. So we're very proud of that. And so it's been a while, so thank you for having me. The last time I was here, it was before Super Tuesday, 20 years ago by, I don't think. 2020. Okay, when did Joe Biden win? He won. So it was Super Tuesday that spring. And I remember us having a conversation about what was going to happen, and the polls looked like he wasn't going to do anything. And I said, I think he's going to pull out Super Tuesday. And then South Carolina came through. So I remember us having a good conversation. So fast forward to where we are today. So my talk today, how the radical imagination of Black women explains our current political moment, is going to situate this election cycle, what we saw during the election cycle, as far as how Black women engaged, and tie that into the research of the book, and then a final conversation, concluding conversation about where Black women are today. This talk will make an effort to introduce the tenets of the book, The Radical Imagination of Black Women, Ambitions, Politics, and Power, and how we can elucidate critical moments of an unprecedented presidential campaign cycle and the response to the election of Donald Trump. Americans have become accustomed to the whirlwind of presidential campaigns that include a constant with political campaign ads on television and airways, an invasion of our personal space through constant campaign text messages, not only from presidential candidates, but also from down ballot candidates, and some who are not even in our states. And this has also led to awkward conversations with family members and coworkers about who they should or should not vote for. I think it's safe to argue that while we have grown used to this frenzy of a presidential election cycle, as a nation, we were not prepared for this most recent presidential election cycle. Following weeks of internal and external pressure from Democratic Party operatives, politicians, and pundits, President Joseph Robinette Biden at 1:46 p.m. on Sunday, July 21st, 2024, posted on social media a personal letter to the American people that stated that while he had intended to seek re-election, that he felt it was best for the country that he no longer remain a Democratic Party nominee, and that he would focus on fulfilling the remaining duties of his current term as president. In the letter, he also thanked Vice President Kamala Harris for being an extraordinary partner in their work. President Biden would send out a second message in the form of a tweet at 2:13 p.m., where she said, "My fellow Democrats, I have decided not to accept the nomination and to focus all of my energies on my duties as president for the remainder of my term. My very best decision as the party nominee in 2020 was to pick Kamala Harris as my vice president. It has been the best decision I've made. Today, I want to offer my full support and endorsement for Kamala to be the nominee of our party this year. Democrats, it's time to come together and beat Trump. Let's do this." Within a couple of hours, the organization Win with Black Women, a collective of Black women leaders across various sectors, who convene on a weekly basis via Zoom every Sunday night at 8:30 p.m. to connect, uplift one another, and find solutions, sent out a message that night's call would focus on the monumental moment of Kamala Harris becoming the first Black woman to be a major political party nominee. At 5:24 p.m., Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, who was a regular participant in these weekly calls, during her interview on MSNBC, mentioned the call. And she said, and I quote, "As a Black woman, I'm going to join later tonight with so many Black women," she said. "There will probably be some 20,000 or 30,000 women trying to get on this call because it's personal for us, and we stand with Vice President Harris." Following Beatty's pronouncement, text messages began to fly across the country with the login information for this call. Due to the high demand of women attempting to join the link, the call had to momentarily stop in order to allow for a new Zoom platform to be open that will allow for more women to join. At the height of the call, there were 44,000 women logged in. While the moment was celebratory, it was also strategic. Donna Brazile gave the directive to the participants who were delegates or new delegates that it was urgent for them to submit their pledge cards in order to lock down the necessary delegates for Vice President Harris in order to secure the nomination and prevent any opposition within the party. Leaders of Black civic organizations discussed how they would lead their organizations to ramp up the get out the vote efforts. Black media strategists gave talking points as to why Harris should be the next president of the United States, while acknowledging the leadership of Joe Biden. But the highlight of the night was when Star Jones called for participants to give money. In less than 2 hours, Black women would raise $1.5 million. The moment would galvanize Democratic Party constituents to hold their own Zoom calls and raise large amounts of money. The media marveled at the feat of 44,000 Black women coming together in short notice and opening their wallet for Vice President Harris. For myself and others who study Black politics and the politics of Black women, this came as no surprise. As I read articles about the win with Black Women Called and its founder, Joteka Edie, who also appeared on news outlets that week, I thought to myself, I expected nothing less than from Black women in this dynamic moment. Here's why. The idea for my book project came to me in 2014 while reading online news articles. Two such articles argued that white women candidates were critical to potential Democratic victories in Republican-led Southern legislatures. My research on Black politics and electoral politics prompted me to question that premise. I knew not only that Black women were more likely to be victorious in their campaign efforts than white women, but also that nationwide, more white women were more likely to vote Republican, and not only in the South. Both my knowledge and the flaws within these articles led me to think more deeply about Black women who sought office and those who were already serving. Who were the Black women who ran for elective office, I wondered? Why did they run, and how did they win? I reflected upon my own experiences and observations of Black political women. Growing up in Savannah, in a working class family and a neighborhood of both working class and middle class families, I was immersed in Black culture and in the ways that Black people understood and did politics. I found politics interesting. And during election cycles, I often observed Black candidates, both men and women, and community leaders on the news advocating for issues that were relevant to the Black community. The women who ran for office were similar to the circle of Black women that I knew. Many of these women were engaged in and spoke highly of organizations and churches to which they belonged. Members and even non-members respected those organizations. For example, during high school, I have a remembrance that I never forgot. When I was in high school, along with my peers, as students tended to complain about their teachers, I was complaining along with a group of friends about an exam we had taken in a previous class. We were walking into our biology class, and our biology teacher, her name was Jackie Merrill. She was actually very young. She was our youngest teacher. She was probably late 30s or maybe early 30s at that. And she heard us talking about this class that we had just taken this exam in, Miss Reddy's class. It was a math class, and it was a very difficult exam. And she just immediately stopped us and told us to stop talking about her sorority sister. And for me, that was an eye-opening moment because I had never heard of the term sorority sister. And for her to just immediately just stop us in a way that she had never really talked to us. We were like, okay, what's going on? She was like, okay, we're sorry, right? So I never forgot that. But women like Ms. Merrill were not only proud sorority women, but they also were members of other organizations. Some of these women could be referred to as what I call super joiners, as they were not only members of these Black sororities as Ms. Merrill and Ms. Reddy were, but they also were actively engaged in other organizations, such as the Links Incorporated, Top Ladies of Distinction, and Jack and Jill of America Incorporated. These were memberships that were comprised of professional, college-educated, middle-class Black women. These same women will often boast about their historically Black college alma maters during homecoming. This included the local HBCU, Savannah State, which will become my alma mater. The local Black newspaper often featured these women for their church and civic engagement. These were the women who ran for office, and they won. Due to my own sorority affiliation, HBCU alumni status, I often engaged with Black women elites who were similar to the women I knew and witnessed growing up. These Black women were entrenched in a network of civic and social organization and community networks. I observed that when a member of these networks ran for office, she often could rely on fellow network members on her behalf. After much contemplation, I knew I had a project. It took several years of reading, writing, and pondering the best approach to the project before I realized that I need to tell the story of how Black women make the decision to run for office and how they win. I came to realize that for many Black women, the resources located within their communities and networks, motivate their decision process and provide opportunities that led to their electoral success. This is evident in the work on when I was in Arkansas's own Senator Joyce Elliott. She was a state senator, former state senator, and her experience as a child attending public schools during the early years of school desegregation and a career as a teacher in various districts led her to champion issues for and became an advocate for women and children prior to seeking office. The network that she had established as a leader in education contributed to her viability as a candidate and an impactful leader in the state of Arkansas. In 2020, an unprecedented number of Black women sought political office, and they were at the forefront of voter mobilization efforts, and they worked at high levels of campaign management. The robust political participation was particularly noteworthy, given America's long history of disenfranchising, neglecting, and ostracizing Black women. The political work began as women organized and fought for freedom from slavery to seeking the right to vote. Black women were instrumental in passing the voting rights in 1965, and today are engaged in activism to address a multitude of issues that impact Black women. Speaking of the campaign trail, in 2019, then Senator Kamala Harris said, "Have faith in the American people to know that we will never be burdened by the assumption of who can do what based on who has historically done it." And she said that oftentimes during this last presidential campaign cycle as well. The words of then Senator and now previous Vice President echoes the belief that despite the mistreatment Black women have faced, they hold to a radical faith that their vision for change through leadership is of value, and it will be accepted by communities outside of their own. Women such as these envision and still envision a more just world in which their resistance matters and benefits both those who look like them and society as a whole. Professor Robin D.G. Kelly refers to this imagination as a way to propose a different way of our social, economic, and political constriction. Kelly stated, and I quote, "Visionary dreams of a new society don't come from the little think tanks of smart people. Revolutionary dreams erupt out of political engagement, collective social movements, and are incubators of new knowledge. For Black women, these visionary dreams formed a culture of resistance that formulated a legacy of struggle for family and community and an ethic of caring." I refer to this type of social vision as the radical imagination that propels ambitious elite Black women, despite adversity and marginalization, to translate their vision of justice, equality, access, and freedom into social action. Black women's radical imagination convinces them that individually and collectively, they can change a world that tells them they are less than. This radical imagination they express through the tangible works of networks, activism that motivates Black women to seek office for a more equitable society. In short, this radical imagination combined with community support often champions and also resources Black political women's ambitions. So in the book, I introduced each chapter with a quote that I thought was relevant to this imagination. So Ella Baker, who is the architect of SNCC, she said, this may be a dream of mine, but I think I can make it real. Rosa Parks said, "I like to be remembered as a person who wanted to be free and wanted other people to also be free." When you are a Black woman, you seldom get to do what you just want to do. You always do what you have to do. Dorothy Irene Height. "I am not wrong. Wrong is not my name." The poet June Jordan. "I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept." Angela Davis. Our politics initially sprang from the shared belief that Black women are inherently valuable, that our liberation is a necessity, not as an adjunct to somebody else's freedom, but because of our need as human persons for autonomy. The Combahee River Collective. Freedom, by definition, is people realizing that they are their own leaders. SNCC member Diane Nash. So the central argument of the radical imagination of Black women, ambition, politics, and power is that elite Black women have a unique political ambition that compels them to move beyond service to seek office. Black women's unique experience of being Black and a woman has shaped their worldview, commitment to community, and how they address and understand their position within society. The literature on political ambition has largely overlooked Black women's political engagement. Why? Because social science in general and political science in particular often neglected the unique and abiding dynamics of Black political culture, a culture that cultivates public opinion and offers resources for potential candidates. But as well as filling in the gap, I also sought to move the extant literature beyond the premise that the political ambition of Black women is less than white women or men. It appears so because political science approaches political participation very narrowly. Other than political scientists tend to disregard mechanisms through which Black women engage politically, such as community and civic engagement. Black women political scientists such as Mae King, Mabel Locke, and Jewel Prestige were the first to chronicle the positionality of Black women in society and politics. Their work showed us that Black women were strategic, deliberate, and constantly engaged in American politics. There are other works that have shown that Black women's political organizing and work have traditionally been in service to improving political and economic conditions for the Black community, and that Black women are significant actors as both voters and candidates. To expand our understanding of how Black women decide to run for office and of the resources that these women are able to access, it is necessary to explore the source of those resources and how Black women are socialized to function politically. Black women have long participated in the political process in a robust way. And researchers have shown that they participate at higher rates than their white female and male counterparts. This behavior has puzzled scholars because they have tended to rely on the scholarship about women's political participation that focus primarily on white women and the access to political resources. However, Black women don't fit neatly into that paradigm in which money, time, and civic skills predict high levels of participation that influence candidate emergence. Why not? Because such resources have not always been accessible to Black people. Instead, these women have found resources in community institutions that assist with mobilization, teach democratic norms, and cultivate political activity amongst the voters. My framework, Ambition on the Margins, allows me to argue that Black women make conscious decisions about the office they seek based on the assessment of which office enables the greatest community impact and how they can best navigate a marginalizing political structure, which oftentimes limits with limited resources or support in seeking office. I observed this phenomenon in the various cities in which I lived. I saw Black women running for office and winning, yet choosing to pursue higher office, not to pursue a higher office in spite of their strong experience and popularity within their districts. By exploring not only women's motivation to run and what resources are available to them, but also the decisions they make to reside in a particular seat, I'm advancing our knowledge about how Black women, Black female elites maintain their community-based interests even as they ascend to power. The factors that are important for us to understand a holistic approach of Black women and their ambition is their political socialization, their gender and racial identity, and their networks and their impact of marginalization. Political socialization of Black women shapes their opinion of themselves, their identity, and sense of agency, and provides mechanisms in which to navigate the world as a Black girl child and later as a Black woman. Battling both racism and sexism, they experience the world differently from those who are not Black and female. Central to my argument is that Black women's ambition is shaped differently and acted out and performed differently than their white counterparts, with whom much of our political science literature focuses. What cultivates this radical imagination is this socialization to serve rather than only to achieve. The very service that Black women provide as individuals and within groups of other Black women is ultimately what releases the resources to support these women who are deciding whether to run for office, and is therefore what helps them overcome challenges when they are running. Regardless of class, Black women have structured their networks of support and activism in organizations. Cheryl Townsend Giltz tells us that in her work, essentially my argument is that Black women's ambition is shaped differently, acted out to perform differently. What cultivates this radical imagination is their socialization rather than serve only to achieve. The very service that Black women provide as individuals and within groups of other Black women is ultimately what releases the resources. Regardless of class, Black women have structured their networks of support and activism in organizations. Cheryl Townsend Giltz tells us that in her work on Black women, she refers to a rebellious professionalism and notes that the racial and gender identity of these women is a political socializing agent that ties these women to their communities. As a result, their organizations, whether social, uplift, or professional, have since the 19th century wedded community needs to those of aspirations of professional Black women. This legacy of combined community and professional associations continues to this day, as we see the numbers and actions of the participants of that Win with Black Women call in July of last year. Black women have long understood that political engagement enhances their lives and the lives of community members. In spite of the marginalization that is evident by continued pay discrimination, sexism, public shaming, and isolation, Black women use political engagement strategically to undermine that marginalization by sustaining ambition and fostering a socialization process that fosters both independence and collective identity through families, organizations, and religious institutions. This marginalization is exhibited in the fact that Black women's contribution to American society and economy has been undervalued and undercompensated. Black women are often among other women of color with the highest labor force participation rate in the nation. But at all educational levels, Black women are concentrated in lower paying jobs than most other groups of workers. While this framework is confirmed by Black women across the country, those that are not represented by those that represent not only Black districts, but they also reside in district municipalities in which Black voters comprise a small percentage of the voters. I'm aware that my framework means that I focus on a particular type of Black woman candidate. The women I interviewed for this book are middle-class women, college-educated professionals who have the means to pay membership, dues, and the time to participate in activities outside of work and home. I'm also aware that although Black women are indeed motivated by community, they are also ambitious and they have personal goals to ascend into power. There are numerous Black women who are career politicians who engage within politics for power. However, due to the communities upon which they rely for votes, these women don't deviate far from the opportunities for community engagement. Through interviews with 36 women of various backgrounds from across the country, I found that the character of the radical imagination is consistent across different political and social environments. This led me to suggest that the radical imagination is evident in the political works and processes for empowerment created by Black women. This includes networks of indigenous organizations, mobilization, and eventually seeking office. Shirley Chisholm exemplified this radical imagination with her 1972 campaign for president. She stated, "If I decided to run, I could serve to give a voice to the people the major candidates were ignoring as usual. Although I could not win, I still might help all the people who were offering me support by increasing their influence on the decision about who would be the Democratic nominee." That did not seem an impossible goal, difficult, but not impossible. Although Chisholm did not win, her vision for her campaign exemplifies this radical imagination and how it takes shape once Black women are elected. The significance of Black women elected has demonstrated their significant role not only increasing the descriptive representation of Blacks, but also increasing substantive representation. Once in office, Black women tend to champion the interests of Blacks and underrepresented populations, supporting progressive agendas that their male counterparts often ignore. This behavior is consistent with the level of community activism that the group uses to address gender and racial challenges. Patricia Hill Collins argued that African-American women embrace a form of identity politics and have developed a worldview that sees lived Black experiences as important to creating a critical Black consciousness and crafting political strategies. I find the community-based interest of Black women is critical to the cultivation and expression of their political influence. For Black elite women, their community provides unique opportunities for leadership development, a base for potential voters, and a separate power resource that is distinctive and often removed from larger institutions, such as political parties that are challenged with structural and discriminatory practices that hinder the success of Black women. So let's talk about the socialization process and how this is the process that produces these women and this political activity that Black women engage in. So when we talk about political socialization, the first place is home socialization. African-American women have always played a critical role in this socialization process and within their communities. They have always contributed to their family and community's economic stability. Economic conditions within the Black community were often complicated and made difficult to begin or maintain marital relationships if they did not provide enough economic support due to employment challenges faced by both Black men and women. As a result, Black families developed different models that often incorporate networks in which Black families provide economically and socially for children. Mothers feel that it is important for their daughters not to allow their gender and their race to be barriers for identity development or for functioning as an adult. This is evident in how mothers themselves praise excellence and achievement, their autonomy that these women held within their homes, and the ways in which they use their income and connections form their careers to give back to their communities. As Black women maintain their roles in the workforce, they also continue to view and value their roles as mothers, seeing the survival of their family tied to the survival of the Black community. Next, there's a communal socialization. As a result of the labor Black women have historically engaged in which they provide this value to the community, this autonomy that they found within their homes and throughout their community gave them a unique social capital within the community. This social capital created a culture that encourages the pursuit of success and good careers, economic self-reliance and political activism, and value in effectively representing themselves to and for the Black community. Most educated Black women were raised in a culture that encouraged their pursuit of successful careers, their achievement of economic self-reliance, and the development as a role model for their community members. Rashay Barnes argued that besides navigating career, marriage, motherhood, and extended family responsibilities, Black women have long been concerned about representing their community. In addition, she informs us that Black professional women engage in what she calls strategic mothering to balance racism, sexism, career demand, and a care for their communities. The continued work in which Black women engage in their communities places them in prominent positions and gives them levels of prestige and influence unmatched in the lives of white women of similar class or backgrounds. Next, we have political socialization. This is a socialization process of Black girls and how it shapes the development of leadership skills and political interests. A recent study of Black girls stated that persons they most admired were women who exhibited care for their communities and families who valued the collective and took risks on behalf of their communities. The researchers found that Black girls are differently inspired to pursue leadership when they encounter Black women and girls leading and championing issues about which they care, whether they are which they care about, and whether they are at grassroots or public level. Black girls are also exposed to images of strength when they watch their mothers and grandmothers balance their jobs, family, and community work. This strength is often considered to ensure survival and a means of protection against the challenges that gendered and racialized discrimination brings. Recent studies about the lives of middle-class Black women bring forth a critique of the perception of the idea of a strong Black woman. While this image is often embraced, it has been viewed as a means to control Black women within and outside the Black community. For many Black women, this image can be seen as a badge of honor and has been used as a strategy for resilience. However, for professional Black women, this image of a woman who not only manages, but is also beholden to career, family, children, community, and spouse comes at a cost. In their study, Thomas and Spate demonstrate that African-American girls are socialized differently than boys. Specifically, boys tend to receive messages about egalitarianism and overcoming racial barriers. Girls receive more messages about racial pride, educational, premarital sex, and relationships with men, psychological and financial independence, and physical beauty. The socialization process and subsequent identity development of African-American girls is unique because of the particular interaction between racism and sexism, and hence may be better conceptualized as gendered racialized socialization. Ruth Nicole Brown, who is considered the foundational scholar in Black girlhood studies, she advances our understanding of the importance and potential of this time period through her groundbreaking work on Black girlhood spaces. She contends that these spaces in the time period are not only for the process of socialization, but for the formation of creativity and relationships of accountability. That she contends is how Black women gain an understanding and value for relationships and community. So now we'll transition to the data that this chapter that I'm talking about was informed by. So the book, I interviewed 36 Black women from across the country who served or currently serve as elected officials. Also women who work within the political parties, as well as members of the media. The interviews were conducted between 2017 and 2021. These women served as U.S. senators, state legislatures, city council persons, So these women were state senators, legislatures, city council persons, and school board members in the South, Midwest, West Coast, and Northeast. These women represented not only districts of majority Black voters, but they also were in areas outside the South, in areas where Black voters were in minority. All interviewees consented to be on the record and permitted the inclusion of their names in the publication. I provide them the transcript to correct, clarify, and strike any statement made during the interview. During the interviews, which ran for about 45 minutes to an hour, I questioned the respondents, and they replied to questions regarding the motivation to run for office, fundraising process, and the expertise that they gained while in office. These interviews were recorded, transcribed, and organized into themes. The resulting data provides significant insight into how Black women learn to engage in politics. So socialized at home and community action. I attended Delta Sigma Theta Sorority's 2019 Delta Days at the nation's capital. At the time, she was treasurer of St. Louis. Her name was Tashara Jones. She served as mayor. She just recently lost her re-election campaign. She commented on public service, and she stated that Black women run to do something. Men run to be somebody. Participating on a panel of other sorority members who were elected positions, she spoke about the value of Black women seeking office. I noted that what drives Black women to do such work is the greater purpose of seeing change in America in their marginalized status. Specifically, that's something that she referred to is the work of the radical imagination. They emphasize traditional and non-traditional forms of political engagement and the work towards justice, equality, and access. This type of vision and work towards it was consistently expressed by the interviewees. Former Georgia State Legislature, D. Dawkins Hagler, expressed that her political participation was in her blood. She watched her mother and grandmother participate in politics. And I quote, I've been in positions my entire life that dealt with some type of social justice or political nature, even forming protests in high school, all the way up through college. And then I ran my mother's campaign for city council in South Carolina, West Columbia. She was the first African-American, first female, and first woman. First African-American, first female, first Democrat to hold a seat in Lexington County, South Carolina, which was one of the strongholds of the Confederacy. The only person I saw active in the community growing up was my mother. She was very active in the Democratic Party. Other than that, I didn't see a lot of Black women actually active, but they were supporting her. I didn't see a lot of girls interested in politics initially in politics, but they would do things to help out. Now, believe it or not, my grandmother was very influential in my life because she was one of the few women and Black women who was very active in the union movement. So she was a union officer back when it wasn't even safe to be engaged in or even talk about unions. She would travel to Atlanta just to go to meetings dealing with labor because she felt like workers should have a voice and that Black people's lives had worth. Meredith Lawson Rowe, who at the time served as city council person in Reynoldsburg, Ohio, she's currently now in the Ohio State Legislature. She participated in politics as a child as well. She said, as a young girl, my mom had always been involved in social action. I've been in church. We've always been involved in community organizing. I can remember as a young girl, maybe about 8 or 10 years old, my mother was a campaign manager for a local county commissioner, and he was our uncle. So that, to me, that's Uncle Bob's campaign. So we wore T-shirts, we passed out literature. My mom has always been political, always involved in politics. So it's been important to me to participate in serving those that don't have equal representation. Terry Caldwell Johnson, who served as the vice chair of the Des Moines, Iowa School Board, she credits her parents with her commitment to service and understanding. Her father was the first African-American elected to city council in Salina, Kansas, and he would become the first African-American mayor of the city. Both her parents were active in civic organizations and social organizations. Caldwell's mother was a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority and Links Incorporated, which Caldwell joined both organizations as well. She informed me that their examples of commitment to community motivated her to be engaged in understanding that running for office is a valuable tool for change. So also what we see with some of these women is that just as they come from communities that encourage their achievement as a means to overcome marginalization or racism, respondents consistently discuss the need to work at a very high level. This translated into knocking on more doors than their opponents did, being extremely well prepared for debates and media events, and finding ways to overcome limitations in fundraising. The memory of lessons learned as children, along with campaign strategies and a work ethic, reflects Black women's unique special social role as women and Black. For many of them, seeking excellence was closely connected with ideas of what it is necessary to thrive as a Black woman and what it is needed to win. Senator Carol Moseley Braun, the first Black woman to serve as U.S. Senate, recalls her mother's words. Her mother said, quote, "I wanted to do the best job I could." That was my mother's line. Do the best job where you're planted. And that was my motivation, to do the best job I could where I was planted. And so I just put one foot in front of the next. And then when it came time, I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office. The commitment to excellence and the desire to succeed was echoed in how the women approached campaigning. Councilwoman Strickland, who was also from Reynoldsburg, Ohio, stated her motivations were very specific. If we only need 1,500 votes, you better get out 2,500 votes. You got to work differently. You got to fundraise differently. You have to have your message different so that others will knock on those doors for you. Lydia Glaze, who served as a city council person in Fairburn here in Georgia, who is now in Georgia State Legislature, when she was a first-time candidate in 2013, she stated that her motivation came from the community work and knowledge of what she had gained in working in the community and what the community needed. She recalled precisely what pushed her to run for office. She was attending a community meeting that was called the Voter Empowerment Collaborative. One of the local leaders was discussing what we referred to at the time, the donut, which is the cities around I-285. And on the South side, those cities had become majority cities. But the elected positions did not reflect the makeup and the demographics of the citizens of those cities. So then we got in the meeting one night, and one of the things that was said stuck in my mind and really prompted me to consider running for office. The word was voluntary apartheid. What that meant was that people of color were the majority in these cities south of the airport, and yet the mayors and city councils were reflective of a white minority in the city. And so with that, it seemed very similar that what was happening in South Fulton was similar to what was happening in South Africa. There was an apartheid somewhat, but it was voluntary because we just didn't have as many African Americans running for office who were able to. And the few that did, they would often lose. So Glaze went on to say that upon making her decision, she found that she had plenty of support to run for office, thanks to her connections she found through her community work and work in various organizations and local schools. The women I interviewed offered more about how they gained insight in the value of political engagement through observing others while serving, while they were young and hearing political ideas and political talk through their communities and the networks in which they were engaged. So this type of political socialization not only translated to these women running for office, but also contributed to those 44,000 women that I talked about earlier who crashed that Zoom site, to come together and to fellowship, to celebrate, and to strategize around the possibility of Black women becoming president. Although Kamala Harris's ascent to the moment was not expected or traditional at all, it is not an anomaly that she was here and the mass intent engagement that coalesced around her candidacy within days. Black women's unique positionality within society contribute to a socialization and understanding of society in a way that led to strategic and purposeful leadership. The 44,000 women on the call came together with their own radical imagination that envisions possibilities of what a potential Harris presidency could bring. So what happens when a vision and a dream and a hope is not only deferred, but in eyes likely never will be? Once the realization that Vice President Harris would not become president, the media and the public began to pose the question of who voted for who and why. As it became apparent that Black women continued to be the most consistent voting bloc for Democrats, and in this case, 92% of Black women voted for Harris, in comparison to 61% of Latinas, 47% of white women, Black women began to question the viability of their coalition politics. Throughout history, Black women have engaged in coalition politics that have not borne fruit. Black women viewed this moment as another example of lack of commitment towards the interests and needs of their communities and in many ways of their own humanity. In light of this, there has been a significant pivot in how Black women discuss political engagement and where their resources should go. So this is a popular picture that came out around the inauguration in which you see Black women sitting on a rooftop, sipping some coffee, and watching the city burn. So Black women have found themselves questioning the purpose of their work when their intellectual, financial, and emotional labor have engaged groups that do not want to be in true community with them. Following the election, this image became extremely popular, emphasizing that Black women were not responsible for what could potentially happen with a Trump agenda that was grounded in Project 2025. This is not the first time that Black women have had to reset and regroup. For many, this moment led to seeking opportunities for enhanced community efforts to lead and respond locally to the impact of Trump's domestic policies. While it may seem that Black women are no longer interested in doing the work, I argue that Black women are tired, and rightfully so. However, the commitment to communities have not waned. This is evident by the disappointment and concern following the election about what could happen to the opportunities for advancement of the overall quality of life and life chances of Black people. So where do Black women go now? I cannot say that all Black women will enter into the political work with the same level of engagement and zeal prior to the election. But I do believe, as the research informed me, that Black women will continue to seek ways to meet the needs of themselves and the communities in which they reside. The radical imagination still exists, but like any imagination, it can shift from one vision to another that seeks to build something new. One of my favorite quotes from the interviews came from former Arkansas State Representative, who is now the mayor of Pine Bluff, Arkansas, Vivian Flowers. This quote was a direct expression of the impact of the radical imagination. She centered her response on to the question of why she ran for office and continues to serve. She passionately spoke of the self-worth and care with which she was raised, and on the desire to ensure that other girls experience the safety and worth that she experienced as a child. And I quote, she said, "I have wonderful parents who came from really beautiful families. Not that we don't have our share of issues and drama and everything that other families experience, but I just didn't grow up thinking I was less than. And I didn't grow up not getting what I needed. I grew up getting most of what I wanted. I didn't have to deal with my parents splitting up. I've never been raped. I ain't never been molested. I ain't never been beat up. The one time my brother got into a fight, I had his back. This boy hit me in front of my father, but I knew that no matter what, my dad was going to protect me, and it made me tough. I am safe. I am free. I am happy. And I just want that for everybody I represent. I just want that for them. And I want it to be where the government or white supremacists or mean, selfish, greedy people don't have any power or impact over another girl like me not being able to live her best life."
What would do you know Stacey Abrams?
I have met her a few times, and we were in conversation to try to get her to interview for this, and we just never could get connected.
Her campaign, both her campaigns, and where you think things could have been different?
Well, I think the first campaign was better than the second one. I think if we look at the election results, you still see basically what you see. Women, when we say women, we have to look at which women are voting for her. So I think, you have a major drop off of white women that did not support her, who she was relying on. I think the second campaign fell short, in which she, I think, was not as authentic, her authentic self. I think there was more of an effort to attract voters who were not going to vote for her. And one of the ads that I remember is the one in the second campaign with her niece. And so there was this effort to show her as this woman who had family, who was baking cookies. And it just came across to me as it's like, why? Which I understood it because it was an effort to push back against stereotypes that Black women are not loved here. She's a single woman, she never married, she didn't have any children. And so this idea about who a candidate could be and what was considered acceptable. But I think it also turned off people who kind of was like, why do you have to do that? Which is very different than the Stacey Abrams that was presented herself in the first campaign.
Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think with Black men, I don't think that had anything to do with it. I think the challenge with Black men overall, there's an issue with women in power. And so within the Black community, there is there is an issue there. But I think even overall, still looking in comparison, the outcome, the turnout for Black men towards her was still higher than the white women. So I think there is an issue with we see men overall, but I think that effort to placate her in a way, I think that was more so for the stereotypes of whites that need to feel comfortable with her as a single woman. Yes.
I'm fascinated with or organizational, community, social kinds of things. I got interested when I started reading about Reconstruction, and I'm was the one that talked about, you know, what's with the statues, and I said, oh, I know who put those statues up. My mother at EDC, or you know, so. And I grew up in a household where my mother was a joiner. And when I read about Reconstruction, it was Black people hadn't been allowed to read. I mean, you could be punished by teaching a Black servant to read. Reconstruction came, and the first thing that happened was schools. They were built, and the teachers showed up, often women, teachers, educators. They taught kids to read. They started newspapers. Newspapers were just everywhere, for all over, Black newspapers, and these civic organizations. And I was really interested in Kamala and AKA her sorority. And sororities were such a big deal when I was in school, and they've kind of fallen away. So many of those organizations have, but Greek societies, the Kiwanis, the Elks, the you know, all kinds of organizations, Blacks flocked to, you know, in the 1900s. And I just thought that was, there's strength in that. That's how you get votes. That's how you get to know one another. That's how you form unions and all of those things. And that's falling away. It's just, I don't think that there's that much, I mean, in the white community. I just don't think that women are doing that as much. And that's where you learn to be a leader. Anyway, that was just my comment. Is it, I don't know, what have I commented about? It's been interesting to see what you're saying about it, but I think there's roots to it.
There's roots to it, and it's African.
Yes.
It's just an African collective nature
Yes.
that African people brought to America.
Yes.
And so you see that even in how Africans survived slavery, where they communed together, they raised their children together, they survived together. And so you see that nature. And then even when you mentioned the literacy piece, Africans were literate when they came to America, right? They were literate in their own languages,
Yes.
in their own knowledge. And so the idea of that, so that generational imprint was still there, right?
Yeah.
And so that collective nature is definitely expressed through Reconstruction, where many of these organizations form, and even going back earlier with Masons, the Prince Hall Masons, you see these organizations of Black men, and even particularly during Reconstruction, and then Black women through the club movement. So the organization, the community push, right? Because regardless of class, regardless of status, free versus enslaved or formerly enslaved, they all were impacted by the racism and the violence. And so collectively, they had this understanding of who they were, but they also had understanding that to survive, they had to do it together. And so you still see these organizations, you still see, I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta, so we have one of the largest, so us and AKA, we have the largest organization. So you see they're live and kicking, right? And they're very critical. And even the women who I interviewed who were not the traditional sorority person or had not participated in sorority life or some of these other, they formed their own organizations.
Yes. Yes.
And so it's very clear that these organizations are important, but also for Black women, they become important, not just only for the political work, but they come together, these organizations are important just for the self-care. These organizations are empowering. They also reaffirming. So if something happens at work and here's a space you can talk freely, it's like, did I interpret this right? Is it just me? And somebody's like, no, that happened to me at my job, right? So they become these spaces where they have multiple purposes. They are edifying, they are fun, they are connecting, they are educational. So all these different spaces become these multi-purposeful, and some of them are formal, some of them are informal, but you see that the collective nature really is foundational to the African identity.
And you're raising families
Exactly.
where the boys and the girls both learn to respect their mother's activities.
Yes.
You know, I think there's more respect for women in that community, in that middle class.
There's more respect, but then to your point, there's still sexism. So even within the community, it is still impacted by the larger American dynamic of capitalism, of sexism. So it's still there. It is still there, but the family units navigate differently, right? So for example, my father, I guess, in some ways, yeah, he was sexist. He believed that he liked to do outside. My father was very, very Southern. So he did the yard and he did all that. And we were supposed to do the inside. I remember one Saturday, I wanted to cut the grass. My daddy said, you do not cut the grass. And he said in a very, very harsh way, my feelings actually. And I just remembered that, right? Now, this is the same man that when I started college, we didn't have the money for my books. He borrowed money from his friend so I can have my books. The same man who told me years ago, you can't do certain things. But yet when it was for me to go to school, he was all in, right? So he never had that. So there's this unique dynamic in which there is a place for some of, there's an idea of place and roles. However, there's still a belief that you have to have opportunity because they understood the nature of being outside the Black community and what was going to be needed to be able to take care of this.
I'm just curious, if the women who were elected in non-minority communities use different strategies. You gave the example of the person on the school board in Des Moines, where I grew up. I just looked up the census. The Black community is only 12%. How do they persuade the greater community to support them?
So there's not only just Terry Caldwell, so the women in Reynoldsburg, they were even smaller because their community had a large South Asian population. So there was them. I interviewed a woman from Vermont, Alaska, so what they did was they were known because of their community work. These women were not strangers. So they were women they were on the YMCA board. They were, their kids played sports. So they were part of the high school fundraiser. So these are women that were known for that service work. And so they were not complete strangers. But what they did was they had a very significant work ethic. So they, like I said, they knocked those doors. They were not a stranger to anyone that was in their district. So they did not allow that, okay, when I knock this door, I'm not going to see a face that looks like mine. They were determined to present themselves to everyone. Now, what's interesting, what we know, and when I mentioned earlier that the data shows us that Black women tend to be more successful, a lot of it is because of Black women's positionality in society. So when we talk about Black women, oftentimes we're talking about women who have a multitude of experiences. If you're talking about issues of healthcare, if you're talking about issues of education, labor, fair wages, Black women can talk about all these multitude of issues in ways because they've experienced them to some degree. And so that increases their chances and their viability with potential voters who don't look like them, because there's often experience that they can connect on because of the dynamics of what has happened in the Black community.
So as you say that, it makes me think of the collective is then encompassing all. And to be engaged in that, the way you've described, is really exciting and powerful. And how to build upon that, how to understand it, first of all, which I didn't understand a lot of what you've told us today until now. And to think about it that way in terms of strategic ways that we can engage together. I don't know, you're saying.
Yeah, so it's strategic way, so it's part of that communal piece of the community, right? So oftentimes when we talk about Black people, and as I said, I was talking primarily Black middle class women, class is different in the Black community, right? So a Black middle class family, let's say, for example, the most visible image of a Black, when I say especially affluent Black, it was the Cosby Show, right? If anybody watched the Cosby Show and watched it throughout its entirety, you may remember Cousin Pam. Cousin Pam was the cousin who was not raised middle class, but she came into their home. So most Black people are in very close proximity to someone who may not necessarily, so even if they are doing well, right? They are in still close proximity to someone who may not. But also because of race, Black people, even if they are affluent. So for example, nursing, you know where I'm going, Black maternal health, right? Black women are the most likely to have challenges in childbirth, regardless of education level. I had a 26-weeker, okay? And all the health complications that came along with that. I have a PhD. I have a pretty good income. I had a really good doctor, but he missed something. And we talked about it after the fact. And he was very white male doctor, great doctor, but he's like, I missed something, right? And so even with that, those are experiences that transcend class, which we know has that there's something there about how the community is treated when it comes to healthcare. And so because of all those experiences, it makes it where these women, when they're campaigning, that they have experiences that many voters across class and across race and ethnicity can understand and relate to.
Yeah, that's critical. Wow.
Are there any questions? Anybody on Zoom? I don't know if there are any questions on Zoom. Okay.
No hands?
Okay.
No, anybody doing?
Hi.
Hi. I've been sitting here, with a thought experiment in essence. It was so interesting when, Barack Obama was able to be successful. And then, toward the end even of his term, the statistics showed that actually the most popular person politically in the United States of color was Michelle Obama. Okay. And Michelle wanted her, to run for president. So she says, I want nothing to do with it. I mean, she didn't even want Barack to run for president, etc. What do you think statistics might have looked like if Michelle Obama, okay, she had her identity within the White House, within the political arena, but as a person who worked with community things, worked with healthcare nationwide as her food for children, et cetera, et cetera. If she would have, let's say she would have been successful with the Democratic Party in becoming their nominee, which is a big if, okay? But if she would have, how do you think statistics might have run? In other words, would she now be judged by an entirely different frame? I mean, one of the frames that I think is the big gorilla in the back is, would she be willing to declare a war? It has to do with the military. If we had a woman who somehow was successfully credited with a successful declaration and campaign of war that destroyed an enemy in the country, etc. That woman might have much more of a chance of becoming president. Because there are little things there within the frame that are expected for president. So could you experiment with us and think about if Michelle would have moved into?
Well, you to your point, particularly about the frame about leadership and who we expect to be leaders,
Yeah.
right? And before our current president, that typically was about military service used to be, pretty high. Military service, previous leadership, business. So there's usually traditional markers. So I had the chat where I talk about ambition and what were the markers that we typically see that lead to people to run for office, and then how people perceive them, right? And so one of them traditionally, right, was the military piece. But as we moved away from, we've had military, we had Iraq. But as we moved away really from Vietnam, you kind of saw that begin to kind of not be the most pressing effort. But I think to your point, there's two things. One, I think when it comes to leadership, there's definitely a different lens in which we look at women as leaders. There are different things that we want to see, and I say we as society want to see in leadership from women. And there's different expectations. And these women talk about that. There's appearance. There is a connection to family, which is kind of what Stacey Abrams had to address when she did make that ad. There has to be the sense that there's a connection to family, whether it is your own children or the family. So you see that with Kamala Harris, with the nieces. So you see that there has to be these check boxes for women to make them palpable to society. But I think to your question about the thought, but then when you look at Black women, there's a different lens, right? And a different level of questioning about competency. Who would have thought that you would have seen a presidential election where a candidate refers to another candidate as basically incompetent and stupid and dumb?
Yeah.
And
Well, consider the source.
yeah, but it is, and I have a chat where I talk about the stereotypes of Black women and how Black women are stereotyped in this rebuke, right? And so the women that I interviewed talked about this rebuke that comes once they won. And there was often this public type of rebuke. One of them talked about when she was going through the orientation process, and she was sitting drinking coffee, and the security guard just was like, came at her like, "You're not supposed to be drinking, da da da." And her white counterparts are drinking, and there's no challenge to them. And then when I interviewed women in Rockdale, city council person in Rockdale, two women, when they were to be sworn in, Rockdale has a process in which you can select the judge that you want to, or the official that you want to swear you in. They pick somebody and they were being told that you can't. And they literally had to be like, no, here are the rules. So there's these different efforts that even once you win, there's still an effort to kind of say you don't have full authority to engage. So I think with Michelle Obama, I think she's a unique position, it's unique to see her, because the question is, why was the world or Americans so enamored with her? What was it? Right? Because she was safe to be in there. She wasn't in a leadership role in the sense of a traditional, she had a leadership, but she wasn't the one that was making the decision. So we could like her, but the man making the decision, so there's a lot of work that's been written about Michelle Obama and what she represented. And particularly now, how it's very different in how she's presenting herself now. And she talks a lot about that too, as far as she had to be put in a box. And if you look at even physically her clothes and
Yeah.
what she wore from the beginning to where she ended. And so there's a lot there. But I think to your point, I think it is difficult for any Black woman to run for office, even as they navigate and find these resources. There is still this structure, there's still racism, there's still the sexism that says you don't belong in this space.
Well, Kamala had prosecuted drug lords. I mean,
Yeah.
Kamala was not shrinking violet by any
Yeah,
means.
yeah.
And Hillary was the Secretary of State for God's sake.
Yeah.
You know, so there's
And it's, yeah, I mean, yeah,
serious stuff.
there's serious people.
And Democrats, we Democrats, or idiots that we are, thought, well, anybody can be drunk because he's so awful.
Yeah.
And we have got to quit doing that. We've got to quit just saying,
Well, we're stuck with the truth, right?
well, he is
We offer the truth.
Yes.
And the Republican, administration gets to tinker with all kinds of falsehoods, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's also the.
So that's an
The
advantage.
sexism was there, yeah.
That the women weren't experienced enough.
Weren't experienced enough, weren't smart enough, weren't, yeah, there was a lot to punch through there.
Yeah. Not male enough, yes.
Yeah, there
I
was a
think
lot.
with any election, you gotta put them in context.
Yeah.
I mean, leaving aside that I thought there might be a woman president in my lifetime, and now I don't. Because I've certainly voted for them. I think her biggest handicap was that she was a Democrat and that there was inflation. And I think that Trump, took advantage of that, of the inflation, and promised to do a better job of the economy. We're seeing what he's doing with the economy now, which is not better. And it was a lie. The economy under Biden was doing very well.
Yeah, they
But-
they don't do a good job of messaging.
I think she had the burden of incumbency with her having been the incumbent. And I think at a time when people have some dissatisfaction. So I think that's a big problem. So I think timing is really important. Whether you're a woman or Black or whatever, I think timing is at this moment. You're talking about whether or not women are tough enough. Margaret Thatcher, and they called her the Iron Lady.
Yeah.
So, Margaret Thatcher, golden era. I mean, these were not shrinking violets.
It's no dummy.
No.
She was a scientist.
So,
Yeah.
but I think Kamala, and I voted for her, I worked for her, but she was carrying incumbency on her back.
Without being yeah, it was a difficult thing to do. I mean, history says that you just can't do it, right? I mean, if you looked at it going into the summer, nobody has ever won when you've had the sitting president, not won. And so you're right, from a messaging standpoint, it was very difficult for them to figure out how to make her the individual candidate without tying her, which actually, looking at the numbers, wasn't really a bad economy. Looking at the numbers, it really wasn't a bad economy looking at the numbers. But now how people experience it, yeah.
Primary process, so nobody had got a chance to pick her except.
No.
And I think that was a problem.
Lucy McBath has done pretty well, and certainly she's been a candidate in my neighborhood. She's probably the only candidate I've ever met.
Yeah.
And of course, then they changed the rules, put her in another district.
She's been in what, 3 districts? It seems like she's never ran in the same district. She's
No,
always
they
there.
kept
Her
screwing
district.
around with her, but she's still in, and she has a very powerful
Yeah.
message with the guns and the rest of it, but it's very frustrating, and it seems like whenever somebody brought this up with the prestige of jobs, as soon as women start doing them, the prestige goes down, if they.
Computer science.
In banks, remember, they were all marble, and they had little bars in front of them, and the men handed out the money, and as soon as they started having drive-through, women started doing it as tellers. They were drive-throughs and
Yeah.
it was just like an ice cream store. And I think that there's probably there's not just blowback after black people get elected, then the whites come after you. But there's also when women get something, then men start running their mouths about, well, it's just not a good job anymore, but we're not gonna be active in politics, which would be fine. And salaries go down, yeah, all of that. But countries that have women in politics, I mean, Sweden, Finland, all these places that have, New Zealand, yeah, I mean,
High quality of life.
yeah, really good government, sensible people. It's not impossible. It's just real frustrating. Damn men.
They
Yeah.
also have more social support in those countries.
Yes, they do. Yes,
But
they
then we
do.
also have to look at why the women don't vote for women. Now, we have to talk about that too.
Yeah.
That's a major.
Well, there's
right?
that, yeah, Trump wants women to stay home and have babies, but he's not gonna support, then they're not gonna support any kind of childcare.
Or education.
Or
healthcare.
Yeah, so,
He doesn't want the government to spend any money. He wants it all to become privatized.
Yeah.
Some of the billionaires can make more money. You know,
So there's
he's
a-
killing the post office.
yeah.
You cannot count on a letter going across town anymore.
So there's a group called Ruby, Rural Urban Bridge Initiative, which is moving very fast in Georgia. And it's a national organization, but you might want to look at it. There's a young woman who's quite electrifying in rural Georgia. I'd like for you to meet her because we went to a workshop in rural Georgia and about 50 counties were represented. They're rebuilding the Democratic Party from the bottom up, basically. So that we have these urban areas which are highly democratic, and then these rural areas that are very red. And so it's about rubbing shoulders with everybody in the community and doing farmers markets and diaper drives and all kinds of community projects. And yes, they are sponsored by the Democratic Party, which is Ruby, R-U-B-I, but co-sponsored by the local hospital or, all the community groups get involved and they're good works. So anyway, I met a young woman at this workshop who was kind of a couch potato. I think she wasn't involved at all. And I believe that she will run for office. And she's in Jenkins County. And she's really something else. I suspect she will be the, congressional representative, of the Democratic chair or something like this. So I'll let you know.
I think that one of my former students, her dissertation from Northwestern was on Blacks in rural communities. It's called Dirt Road Democracy. And so she talks about the rural community, basically pushing back against who was in the rural community and how they understand politics and what their political needs are. So it's a area as far as research and also for outreach that is untapped.
Because all of these states that have Republican dominated legislatures, I don't know if you've followed the bills that passed, but it's horrendous.
Yeah.
I'm a trans parent and the legislation has just gotten worse over the last years.
Well, and my son too is in Iowa, which is quite red. We did find out he can change his birth certificate in Michigan, which means he can then change his driver's license and get a passport, which right now he can't.
Yeah, and
But Iowa, if he were born there, he couldn't change the birth certificate.
and the thing is, it's really the local politics is where the action is going to be.
Yeah.
And the challenge for many Democratic voters or Democratic leaning voters is that the districts are so gerrymandered. And even on the state level that you can't win. You can't break through. So for example, from Savannah, Savannah can't elect they really cannot elect that many, where the districts are drawn, they get one little pocket for the state legislature, and the district is drawn in such a way, even the congressional district, is drawn in such a way that a city that is, well, city and county, so the county, if we include the county, you're talking about, depending on year, it ranges anywhere from 48 to 55% Black. They cannot elect a Black Congress or a Democratic Congressperson because of how the districts are. And so that is the issue, that these districts are so drawn and they're so rigid that you can't even, that even the districts that I can't remember the term, but I remember Sandra Day O'Connor when they had one of the last gerrymandering cases was around the districts that touched, right? That there was this idea that if you had a gerrymandered district that was purple or, and it was close to a blue, that because they were close together, that would influence, so these influence districts, right? That was part of this conversation around how these districts were drawn as well. But they're so rigid that it doesn't matter about what's happening in the district that may be in the next neighborhood over. They're just too rigid that you can't win.
Yeah.
You can't win.
And the computer is so successful in finding the percentage
Yes.
of things that you can just
Oh,
gerrymander.
You can gerrymander, yeah.
So,
Their software, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my master's thesis was on that. Yeah. Yeah, because if you all remember, Cynthia McKinney, that was the beginning of this, right? When these majority Black districts were drawn in the South, to reflect kind of the population growth that had happened. And then they were redrawn, and then that kind of began this slide to where these districts are now hard drawn, red, in ways that just you cannot elect a candidate, because really courts say, well, can you elect a candidate of your choice? It's not about race, because Black voters vote for white candidates. It's about that candidate of your choice.
Mhm.
And so cannot elect the candidate of your choice, you're being disenfranchised.
I was pleased with the last one. It put me in John Lewis's district.
Yeah.
I like being in John Lewis's
Yeah,
district.
that lasted a while, that's good. I have a question off topic, but
I think we have, how much time we have?
Well, you're right, like, as long as your schedule doesn't.
I think I'm okay.
Yeah.
I think I'm okay. Go ahead.
I'm curious about what Emory's gonna do, whether it's gonna sign on with other universities.
Now, I do not have the answer to that question. I really do not. I do not. Well, what I will say is this,
No, I'm just interested in the issues.
I know,
Just what's keeping them plummet, but and what we have to consider. We do have to consider just a whole lot of stuff.
so, yeah, I do have a 130-second sentence. What I do know is that the president's approach, is, well, he contributed to the letter for the AAU.
Right.
So his approach is that he likes to participate in the drafting of the letters. But it doesn't mean that because there's not a formal signature that he does not support the values that is espoused in the letter. So that's all I know. That's all I know.
Signing them and then having it back out, I mean, it's so fluid.
It's very fluid. Yeah, I haven't looked at it. I just know that when the letter came out, the system crashed because I saw it that morning. And then when it was, I guess as names were being updated, and everybody was looking to see if their university or their alma mater was being represented. The page actually crashed that afternoon. And then by that night, I think it was over 200 signatures, and I think it's over 300 there. So, but the AJC did an article about that as well. And there's been some other articles about the politics of the region. There's a lot of context. This is Pearl talking. This is not, but there's a lot of context to public letters. I'm a president of a National Political Science Association. And so you get requests to sign letters and write statements, and there's a lot of context there that you have to think about when you're doing that. So can't speak for the president, but I do know that, as a university, he firmly, believes in values that are espoused in that letter.
Well, yeah, we have so many things with the connections with the CDC and NIH grants and so many of the big issues that, well, what's Duke doing? What's Randy doing? I mean, it is regionally, is anything going on?
Well, so most of those, so all those universities are peers, AAU peers, so they are collectively, I think they have an AAU meeting. I think it's today or tomorrow, actually. So they're working together to coordinate and think about responses and what is happening to their schools. So those councils of presidents, they're in close conversation around these issues. So AAU, I'm not sure if anybody goes on the AAU website or sign up for their webinars, but they've been doing a really great job of providing updates on higher education, their presentations from different leaders from the schools. So the AAU web page has really been really good. And they have noted record turnout to their webinars. Before they would get a handful of people, but they do weekly webinars that really give some really timely updates about where we are in higher education, what
What does
legislation.
that stand for?
AA, the American Association of Universities.
Okay.
So they have webinars as well as ACE as well. So we're, as Emory, we're a member of those. So we're a member of all those associations, AAU, AACU, ACE. So those organizations are providing a lot of information to the higher education community about where we are, the trends, legislation, how to respond, guidance to faculty, conversations around academic things. So those are great communities. So that's where another way where you can find out kind of what's happening with the other schools, because you'll see presentations from other school leaders about issues. So I've been watching those, but those are great. You can just sign up. Like I said, we're members, so you just have to just log in, put your Emory email address, and you get the emails for those webinars and for those contact.
It's not AAUP.
So
It's
AAU, and then so there's AAU, and then that letter was AACU. There's so there's a whole list of organizations that we're affiliated with.
Okay.
But those are the main ones that are doing a lot of the public communication to higher education about the issues.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.